Happy New Year, Mom Nation, and welcome back to our very first Our Love Story episode in 2025. What's up, Dyanna?
How are you?
Doing amazing. How are your holidays?
Good. It went by really fast.
You really did.
Yeah, and really weird having them in the middle of the week.
I know.
It was hard to get back on track after that, you know?
And then first, I don't know about for you, but first day of school for us was Thursday. And asked me if I thought it was Monday all day yesterday.
I'm not surprised. Like, time is like in a vortex since Christmas, you know?
So true.
It's crazy. The time period between Christmas and New Year's is like, nobody knows what day it is. I don't know if I have to go to work today. Is it a weekend? What time is it? When was the last time I ate a vegetable?
Yeah. Carbs.
Right? Everything I've been eating is like beige and brown for the last 4 days.
Oh my goodness.
So we're just trying to get back on track here.
Yes. I think we all are. So welcome,
Definitely.
mamas. We are back on track. This is Our Love Story with the lovely and amazing Dyanna Eisel, certified couples counselor. I almost lost my words there for a second. We love her. She's our absolute favorite. And we are here every month and have been for like 3 years or something. I think we might be working on our fourth.
It's wild.
Yeah. And we're here talking through the stuff that you want to talk through. Talking through relationships, talking through what's trending for couples, talking through the obstacles that couples run into, talking through the different seasons of relationships, right? Because things change after you've been together 5 years, 10 years, 2 decades. You know, things just kind of tend to morph into something different season of life, different goals, that kind of thing. So we are here to hopefully help out some couples out there. If we help out just one couple, we've done our job, Dyanna. So thank you for being a part of that.
Thank you for having me. Stoked to be here.
Yes, as always. Let's talk about fighting.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
Fighting is probably the main reason. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but is fighting the main reason you see new couples?
Conflicts, yeah. Conflict that's unresolved, that's created some resentment, and couples that feel like they don't know how to have conflict effectively without it getting completely out of control.
Yeah. And when there are triggers and emotions and attachment styles and childhood traumas involved, especially in such an intimate setting, intimate relationship, that can kind of go haywire quick, huh?
Absolutely. We're such complex creatures, you know, and some of that stuff we don't even become aware of until it's happening. And then sometimes we still don't even know why we're doing the thing until we start digging into like why we do that, you know? And when we dig into why we do that, it becomes far more objective than it is just to say like, oh, well, you do this because you're this way, or I do this because I'm this way. Well, no, there's a reason that you do the things that you do, behave the ways that you do, right? And when you look at it objectively, it suddenly becomes something that's like easier to manage because it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. I know why you behave that way in a conflict. Like that makes sense to me. I understand a little bit more about your attachment and your history and what makes you reactive. You know what I mean? And so then we can navigate around that differently because then it becomes like a shared problem. It's not me against you sort of thing, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like just like with most anything, we take our fighting style from what we learned growing up.
Absolutely. What our frame of references of what conflict looks like is often what we take into our adult relationships.
So let's talk about the different styles. Is there a thing, like this is your department, totally not mine, and I'm stepping into something I have no clue about. Are there different fighting styles?
You know, you could say that there's different fighting styles, but really, I think there's different reactions and different dynamics that happen in conflict. So reactivity can be yelling. Reactivity can also be shutting down. Both of those are responses, just like trauma responses, right? Like there's fight or flight, freeze, and fawn. So there's 4 different types of trauma responses, and those show up in conflict as a reaction, right? Versus a response. A response is something that you get when they're regulated, when they're not like completely out of their window of tolerance, dysregulated, all that stuff. You get a response. You get a reaction when we're completely dysregulated and out of it. You know what I mean? So rather than like conflict styles, there's trauma responses sometimes that we have to contend with our partner. You know what I mean? So in conflict, if you're applying the trauma responses to that, right? Like fight is someone who might yell or like get really confrontational or get really aggressive and using their hands a lot, you know, all of that stuff. That's very like fight, right? Trying to like fight the threat. And then flight is like, I'm out. And that's usually like when people just like, I'm not doing this, like whatever, leave the house, leave the room, whatever, to like escape the threat, right? And then freeze and fawn kind of have a little bit of a similarity. They're both for protection. They're both to protect ourselves. But fawn is just like, okay, yeah, like you're right. Like I'm just, you know, I'm probably just overreacting. It's probably just, you know, I've had a really long day. I'm tired. Like I totally get it. Just trying to like appease what the threat is. And freeze is just literally just like, I don't have anything to say, but I'm not shutting down. I don't know what to do with all of this that's happening. You know what I mean? So all of those responses show up in conflict, not only as a trauma response, but also what did we observe our own parents doing that we think is like the right quote unquote way to like handle conflict. You know what I mean? So there are reactions and responses, and then our learned reactions and responses from our own childhood that make up conflict rather than just like conflict styles, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And thank you for going into the explanation of those 4 reaction styles. Can we dive a little bit deeper into that? And let's just say, for instance, with all 4 of these, so let's say, for instance, I'm in conflict with my partner and my partner reacts in fight. What kind of tools can I possess that can help mitigate that situation and get the point across, get the communication flowing?
Absolutely. There is a difference between attempting to get the other person to calm down and setting a boundary for yourself. Those are 2 very different things. If you are attempting to control somebody else's emotions to get them to calm down, that could easily slide into fawning, right? We're just like, I want to de-escalate this situation, which there's nothing wrong with wanting to de-escalate a situation, but you cannot control somebody else's emotional response. You got to stay in your lane. You know what I mean? Like they're going to be in their lane. You're going to be in yours. That's where like the boundary comes in clutch, right? And that can just simply be, you know, if you're getting like yelled at and they're coming at you like really aggressive, confrontational, whatever, you know, like I can tell that like this is really upsetting and I don't think this is a good idea to continue this right now. So I'm going to go walk the dog and then let me know when you're ready, but I'll be ready in about an hour if you are. You know what I mean? Ideally, the person that's getting reactive should be the one to pull the plug on that and to say like, I can already tell like this is not going to go well. I'm already getting pissed off. I need to take a break. I'm going to go take a shower and then I'm going to come back and we'll finish this conversation. You know what I mean? But if that person is unwilling or unable in that moment to do that, we can set a boundary saying like, I'm not going to be yelled at. So I'm going to exit this situation, but I'll be back. You know what I mean? But let me know when you're ready to talk, but I won't be yelled at, right? A boundary is not controlling someone else's behavior. It's what I'm going to do if I see or observe something happening that makes me feel unsafe. Boundaries exist to keep ourselves safe while being in relationships with others. You know what I mean?
Yes. And that is not to be confused with flight.
No, because you're still making it very clear that like, this is what my boundary is. I will not be yelled at. I am not going to be yelled at like that. You know what I mean? Or I'm not going to be on the receiving end like of this aggression right now. You know what I mean? Like this is just something I'm not going to tolerate. I'm not going to do, right? When someone just like leaves the situation or the conversation, like that's totally flight. Like they're trying to protect themselves from the perceived threat. So they're leaving, you know what I mean? But often that escalates things even more because then you start creating this like pursuer distancer dynamic. Yeah. So like the distancer is trying to pull and the pursuer is like chasing them down, you know what I mean? And then it creates this double bind which is just like a fancy way of saying you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You know what I mean? And that can be disrupted by that person who, is attempting to get space, not flee, but attempting to get space by saying like, I'm already getting upset. I know that this isn't going to go well for me. I need to take some time to calm down. I'm going to go do this for an hour, 2 hours after dinner, whatever. And then I will come back and we'll talk about this. That commitment to return, if you are the distancer, that commitment to return makes the difference between coming back to a conflict to resolve it and rug sweeping, right? Most people see that as like, okay, well, I'm going to leave until I calm down. And then we're all calm now. So we really don't need to do that anymore. You know what I mean? And then it just goes completely unresolved and it just gets rug swept. But that time, that commitment to return makes the difference between getting it resolved and just rug sweeping it. You know what I mean? So if that person is trying to create distance, makes a commitment to return, now it's the pursuer's job to not continue to pursue, right? It's like to give them the space that they're asking for, because when you don't, that breaks trust, right? Like both of these individuals, the pursuer and the distancer, have a responsibility to either negatively or positively impact the trust in the relationship by doing what they say they're going to do. So if the distancer says, I'm going to come back in an hour, and they don't, well, the next time you're in a conflict and you say, I'm getting stressed out, I'm leaving, they're like, no, you didn't come back the last time. So I don't trust you, right? And if this pursuer, if they just keep pursuing, this distancer is going to lose trust in them too, because they said, hey, like I asked for space and you're not giving it to me, so I don't trust you. You know what I mean? But if that pursuer is like, okay, like, all right, I'm just going to have to self-soothe until you come back when you say you're going to, that has built trust. You're going to do what you say you're going to do. You're going to give space when it's asked for, and you're going to pause when you're asked to. You know what I mean? So that's the difference between just like flight and leaving a conversation and pressing pause and making a commitment to return to it.
Yeah, that second part feels a bit more responsible to the commitment of the relationship.
Right.
Seems more communicative.
Right. It's just telling the other person, this is where I'm at. I really don't want this to go south. I really don't want this to turn into this big reactive conflict because we're not getting anything accomplished at that point. Reason and logic have checked out. We're running on raw emotion, and rarely does anything really get solved when you're running off of raw emotion.
Yeah, no, very, very seldom, if ever, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we deal with somebody that reacts and freeze?
So someone who reacts and freeze is clearly just so flooded and so overwhelmed that they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. Freeze, again, as a trauma response, is rooted in a childhood traumatic experience or a variety of experiences where they were just powerless and they didn't know what to do and they didn't really have anywhere to escape to. So they were just like, it's kind of like that shock, where you're just like, after something traumatic happens, a car accident, something like that, you're just kind of like in shock and you don't really know what to do. You don't really feel anything. You're just so flooded. All the chemicals in your brain are chemicaling, you know what I mean? And not in a great way, that you just freeze. So if you know that your partner has a tendency to freeze in conflict, or you are the partner to freeze in conflict, there's an opportunity there to see like, hey, like I can tell something's happening. Like, do we need to take a break? You know what I mean? If the person that's in the freeze mode is unable to say or recognize in that moment that like, I need some time to process this, to keep this conversation going. I just can't right now. If they're unable to do that, having knowledge of each other's trauma responses comes in clutch when you're having conflict. You know what I mean? Because then you're coming more from a curiosity standpoint and you're seeing like something's happening and I don't want that to happen. So like, I'm going to check in real quick. Like, is everything okay? Like, can we continue this or do we need to take a break? You know what I mean? We don't have to like bulldoze through anything to find out who's right, who's wrong, or whatever. Like, we don't need to do that unless you're not invested in the future of your relationship, of course, and you just want to do more damage. Then yes, absolutely. Just keep plowing through when you're emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. How about Fawn?
Fawn it can look very like people pleasy, right? So it can look like, oh, you're right, or, I shouldn't have done that, or making excuses, or, any of that. If you know that you are the person that fawns, again, like, it is not a criticism or a judgment that is your trauma response. You have experienced something in your life that has created that response to protect you. So, like, good on you for creating a response that has protected you for a very long time. But like we know about all other defense mechanisms, at some point they stop working, because usually they start interfering in our relationships. They affect our ability to set boundaries. They affect our ability to have expectations, all kinds of stuff, right? So if you're the person that's fawning, you can resist or learn to resist the urge to be the people pleasy part, right? That, like, no, like, I understand, but I also won't be yelled at, or, like, I can already tell this is not going well. I don't want this to go any further. I think we should take a pause and come back to it in an hour, 2 hours, whatever the case is. And really resisting that urge to just go with it when you don't feel comfortable. If you're the partner of the person who tends to fawn, again, there's like an observation, a curiosity piece there, right? That, like, well, no, like, clearly this is something that's important. Obviously you're bothered by it. I don't want you just to agree with me just to stop this conflict. That's not healthy. This is going to come back up later if we don't hash this out now. So I would rather you just tell me how you really feel, and tell me how, like, you really want to resolve this conflict, or what the issue is for you, so we can get through it and we can resolve it. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's like a little bit like of a nudge to help create safety, right? Like, you have to provide that safe place for them, of course, but, like, no, it's safe for you to, like, disagree with me right now. Like, it's totally safe, but, like, that person wouldn't have that trauma response if they didn't feel like they were being attacked. You know what I mean? So the person that's on the other end of that, their partner, really has to do some reflecting. If they see this as a pattern in conflict and relationship, what am I contributing to this? Like, what are my own actions? What are my own behaviors that might be triggering this sort of trauma response in the other person? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see how that scenario can be a bit rug sweepy as well, just like the previous scenario.
It's 100% rug sweepy. I just want the conflict to stop. You know what I mean? And it's very much your negative emotions or your big feelings make me very uncomfortable, and I want them to stop. It's very similar to, like, a solution finding dynamic that we find in a lot of relationships too, right? Where I see this a lot, with couples, where it's like, oh, I had, a really bad day at work today, and so called in for the third day in a row. And so I had all this extra work, and I'm so irritated and frustrated this is happening. And then their partner's like, well, why don't you just tell your supervisor? And it's like, gee, wow, didn't think about that. Like, no, I didn't need a solution. I just needed you to be like, wow, that really sucks. Like, I would hate being in that position right now. So, like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you think you're going to do about it? You know what I mean? Which is very validating, right? So, like, that's sort of similar to, like, solution finding. The solution, the person who's providing the solution, is often not just trying to find a way for their partner to fix it. It is sometimes, but more often than not, I see there's a lot happening right now, like, with your emotions, and I don't really like it. Like, it makes me really uncomfortable. So I'm just going to give you a solution so that we can just stop. Like, I don't want to see this anymore. I don't want to hear it anymore, because I'm uncomfortable with that. You know what I mean? That's very much like a emotional intelligence, emotional safety sort of thing, right? That I can hold space for you if you're dysregulated, and not get dysregulated myself. You know what I mean? Which is a flex.
Absolutely. I see a lot just in me being out in the wild, and with other people. And then I see it a lot in Mom Nation too, that some people do tend to have discomfort with another's emotional emotions.
Yeah. Emotional reactivity, for sure. For sure. So there was It's interesting when you talk about like conflict in relationships, right? Because we're just talking about like, oh, what are the trauma responses? How do we respond to it? How do we resolve conflict and respond and not react and all of those things? So what happens when you have kids in the picture
Ooh.
at home and you are the parents that are going through a conflict or whatever? I can tell you what happens when we have parents that go behind closed doors to have the conflict, right? Like they go because their intentions are, I don't want our kids to see us to have a conflict or an argument. So we're going to go into the back room. We're going to go to the garage and go outside, whatever, with the good intentions of like shielding our kids from seeing conflict. Now, there's always a caveat to that, right? Like if we have not mastered how to respond and not react, and we're just like yelling and super reactive and big scary emotions, like all of that, like that shouldn't be happening, period, but especially not in front of your kids because they're watching. But they're also watching what happens if you go and take it behind closed doors, right? They grow up to be adults that do not know how to handle conflict because they didn't see it happen.
Right.
They have no frame of reference of what healthy conflict resolution looks like. Once we've mastered those skills in our adult relationships, it is totally fine and in fact healthy for kids to observe us having a conflict,
I
because
agree.
they can observe being respectful. They can observe taking a break if needed. They can observe, word choice, you know what I mean? Body language. They're watching all of those things. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? There's this idea that like, oh, kids should never see their parents argue. Definitely not, because then they get into relationships when they're adults and they don't know how to fight fair. Like they don't know how to have a conflict with each other because they never saw what that looked like. And they associate conflict with bad.
Right.
We were protected from the conflict. And so having a conflict is bad. And those are the people that typically they're more like avoidant or avoidant dismissive in relationships and don't want anything to do with big emotions or conflict, confrontation. You know what I mean? Because they have no idea what that's supposed to look like. And that's not your fault. That's what your frame of reference. Like that's what you had to observe. You know what I mean? But it's something, one of the many things, to talk about with your partner is like, what was it like for you when your parents had arguments when you were growing up? Like, what did you see? What did you not see? You know what I mean? Because that's going to inherently make an imprint on the adult now as to how they want to resolve conflict or confront conflict in their relationship.
Yeah. That is so huge right there. I am so glad that you brought that up because I do hear a lot of conversations. I see a lot of stuff. There's over 12,000 moms in Mom Nation. So I'm seeing posts and conversations and all of that happening. And I do see the conversation come up about hiding the conflict from the kids. And I'm so glad that you clarified that for us, because I have felt the way that you just explained that, hey, it might not always be pretty. And obviously, there's things that we should adhere to keep it respectful and that kind of thing, right? But kids need to see things that aren't always pretty.
And they need to see what conflict looks like. You're going to have a life full of conflict. Relationships are always going to have conflict, but we can look at conflict as this like scary, avoidable thing that we should just like avoid at all costs, you know what I mean? Or we can look at it as like, yeah, this is a pretty natural part of adulting and and having relationships with people is we're going to have conflict and it's fine. Like I know that I'm working on creating a relationship to, consist of emotional safety, that we can have conflict and it's going to be fine. It's not something that I have to dread or avoid or run from. Like it's going to be just fine. You know what I mean? But more often than not, that's not something we learned growing up. It's something we have to teach ourselves now.
I agree. And if we think about it from a common sense standpoint, you have two people that probably grew up in completely different parts of the country, world, whatever, that were raised by completely different people and completely different backgrounds and traditions coming together. Of course, there's going to be some rub. I mean, we have to be oblivious to not think so,
Definitely. There's always going to be things to have conflict about, and that's fine. That's how you build more connection, is through conflict. And I know that sounds crazy, but like every time you resolve a conflict with your partner, that builds more trust in the relationship, that I can consistently expect from you this type of interaction. And I can also trust that consistently, if you feel like your emotions are getting away from you, that you're going to pull the plug on it because you don't want to inflict damage. You know what I mean? There is something so intimately powerful about knowing that about your partner that just is critical for having a really strong emotional intimacy. You know what I mean? Is that consistency and trust and knowing that you're staying in your lane, I'm staying in my lane, but we can both trust each other to not inflict damage on each other once we're aware of what that is. You know what I mean?
And I think that it boils down to the old thing that we always talk about is people just need to be seen and heard, right? And so it also gives that opportunity to be seen and heard by your partner. And I can see how that builds more trust. I totally understand that. And safety and feeling like you're safe with that person.
Absolutely. Safety isn't always the big things. Trust isn't always about the big things. It's not always about, infidelity or abuse or those things. Like, I can trust that you won't do those things to me. Like, great, but that's like basic cost of admission, right?
Yeah.
But I also need to trust that all those things that I said previously, like you're going to be considerate, that you're going to listen, that you're going to be consistently calm when we're having a conflict, and that if you can't, because you're a human being with emotions, that you're going to pull the plug on it and take a break because our relationship means that much to you that you want to get through this from a very calm, regulated place and not a reactive place, not only for our benefit, but for our kids' benefit too,
Totally agree. This first episode of 2025 certainly packed a punch, didn't it?
Sure did. Sure did.
Is there anything else about fighting styles or effective fighting tools that you would like to add?
Well, I'd like to send a message out there that, learning about conflict resolution and how to have healthy conflict and all of that stuff, does not apply if you find yourself in a DV situation where domestic violence is present. And please remember, domestic violence is not always just physical violence. You have resources available to you. The domestic violence hotline website has an easy exit if you need access to that, so that there's no, it's not saved to your browser history, anything like that, so that you can get resources if you need, because that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about de-escalating conflict to keep yourself physically safe. If you are not physically safe, there are resources out there for you. If that is not the case and you are reflecting on your own conflict in your own relationship and you're thinking like, I really wish that things were a little bit different, like, use those I statements we've talked about before, right? Because like everyone's going to be more responsive to what you have to say when you start a sentence with I, right? But maybe this can be a really good conversation starter with your partner later. Like, hey, like I was listening, I was watching about like different trauma responses and like how to respond to conflict and things like that. And I don't really love the way that we have conflict. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how do you feel about it? You know what I mean? And that might get a conversation going about like, yeah, I don't like when I get really reactive and I yell. Like, well, I don't really love that either. So like, let's find a way to have like an exit plan here, that if you feel like you're getting really angry or really reactive, that you can just tell me that you're going to come back in like 2 hours or after dinner, but give me some sort of time down commitment so I know that you're going to come back and that you're committed to resolving it. You know what I mean? And sort of use some of that information to look at the conflict cycle in your own relationship and like, how can we make a positive impact on that and start that conversation? You know what I mean?
Totally agree. Maybe we should add this to one of the conversations you should have before you say I do. Remember that show?
Definitely. Definitely.
We just added
Let's talk about fighting before we're fighting, because we're in the honeymoon phase and everything is great.
Exactly. Oh, the things that we know now that we could have resolved then.
My gosh,
right?
so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Dyanna. And I think it might have been a few shows since we have chatted about this. Can you tell the people how to get in touch with you and what you offer to the people to connect?
Yes, definitely. If you visit my website, it's DyannaEiselTherapy.com. In the upper right-hand corner, you can schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation with me so we can chat a little bit and see if we're a good fit. And then otherwise, you can also follow me on Instagram, Dyanna Eisel Therapy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if you guys want to check out any of our previous episodes, we dropped a couple of previous, we talked about a few during this show. So if you want to check out any of those episodes over on YouTube, it is at Mom Nation USA. That is our handle. If you prefer to listen to it on your favorite podcast platform, do a quick search for Mom Nation Talk Radio. There we are. Like, subscribe, notify, all the things, download, and you will never, ever miss an episode. We will see you next time. Thank you so much, Dyanna.
Thank you. Bye.